Boker Tov, everybody, and welcome to Hi There with Rabbi Leah. It's so good to see you all again. Cannot believe it's Friday. The weeks seem to be going a little bit more quickly now, even though um, there's a lot of monotony, but trying to create new and wonderful things every day. So we're going to start our Hi There program this morning by singing Moda Ani Lefanecha. If you are a lady, Moda Ani Lefanecha. If you are a gentleman, it's the first thing we say when we open our eyes in the morning. I am grateful before you. I give thanks before you, God. Moda Ani Lefanecha. Melechai Vikaya. שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה רבה אמונתך רבה אמונתך. And we've been studying Pirkei Avot for the last several sessions, and this is a section of the Mishnah, as those of you who've been studying along know. And I believe that, and I think that the ancient rabbis believed, and most believe, that studying Torah, doesn't just mean studying the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, but Torah study can take on many, many forms. And since the Mishnah is considered to be part of the oral Torah, not the physical written Torah, which Moshe received at Mount Sinai, but Torah that he was given orally and then was passed on through an oral tradition, I believe that we should say the prayer for studying Torah. And so I'm going to lead us in that prayer right now. If you don't know it, you can say Amen at the end. And if you do know it, please join with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Adonai, our God, divine wonder of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to immerse ourselves in the study of Torah. And the Hebrew word is la'asok, with a k sound at the end, not la'asot, that means to do, but la'asok, which means to engage in or immerse in. And I love the word la'asok because it sounds like you're soaking in Torah. So that's an easy way to remember. I have all kinds of mnemonics so that you can remember the Hebrew words. So just to do a little bit of review, we have reached the point in the first chapter of Mishnah Pirkei Avot, where we've been introduced to the pairs of rabbis that are joined together in this union of twins, even though biologically they weren't twins, to talk about various aspects of life. And the first pair that we met were the Yoses, Yosei ben Yochanan and Yosei ben Zaredah. And we learned what they had to say, Ben Yoazer, of Zaredah. And, they had some interesting things to say about life, about women, about study, about judgment, and so on. Some of the things were palatable, and some of them were a little less tasty. Let's put it that way. The stuff about don't waste your time talking to women because all they'll do is chit chat about idle, frivolous things, then they'll take you away from your Torah study. And besides, they're not very smart, and you can't talk about Torah with them. So why are you bothering? Today, I'm going to introduce you to two new, to the second pair, one of whom we read about yesterday, and the other one of whom we'll learn more about today. So yesterday, we were introduced to Joshua ben Parachia and his partner or twin for this section, Nitai the Arbalite. And we learned that Joshua ben Parahiah said, appoint yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion or a friend, and judge all people with the scale weighted in in the favor of the person that you're judging. In other words, don't jump to conclusions, don't make rash decisions, really give people the benefit of the doubt. So Joshua ben Parahiah talked about, find yourself a teacher, a lifelong teacher, somebody who is a mentor, whom you can look up to, whom you can learn from, who will always be there for you. And then secondly, once you found this teacher, find yourself a friend for Torah study, a Chevruta partner, and then judge people fairly. Now, his partner, the rabbi that he's kind of paired up with, is Nitai the Arbalite. And Mishnah 7 is of the first chapter, contains the teaching of Nitai, and he was from Arbel, which is why he's called the Arbelite, just like Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, was called the Giladite because he was from Gilad, Hagiladi. So, that I would be Leah the San Eliho Hillsite, I guess, or something like that, or the San Marcos site, if we were to put it in Mishnaic terms. So here's what Nitai the Arbalite used to say. 3 things. A lot of them said 3 things. Keep a distance from an evil neighbor. Do not become attached to the wicked. And do not abandon faith in divine retribution. Wow. 3 pretty incredible and somewhat different things. So in the previous Mishnah with Joshua ben Parahiah, he taught that one should not judge others with the scale weighted in anybody's favor. Now, Nitai, the Arbalite, is kind of balancing that advice by adding that there may nevertheless be some objective differences between different people. The fact that one should judge everyone favorably doesn't mean that you shouldn't stay away from wicked people. And that, in fact, in many rabbis in a variety of different places teach that the person who associates with evil people, even if he himself is not wicked, runs the risk of having some of those behaviors rub off on him. So we always tell our children and our grandchildren, hang out with the right crowd. Don't run with the wrong people because they will suck you into their bad ways. And so part of forming a just society and a righteous society means that each individual person has to be very careful about with whom they associate, so that we don't end up getting in with the bad crowd and possibly being impacted by their behavior, which would take down society, because society really requires of us good behavior so that things run smoothly, which is kind of interesting given that there are some communities in some states that are now deciding to go against the state issued orders to stay at home and have decided to open up their beauty shops and their restaurants and their bowling alleys and their massage therapists and their tattoo artists and all those essential services that they think people can't live without, and possibly endangering others. So the care of the community, at least according to Nitai the Arbalite, is critical, because without some kind of a communal norm, things can go astray. Now, the third statement that he makes, although it seems to be unconnected to the first 2, is really connected to the previous statements, because if you see a lot of wicked people, you may begin to think, well, why not be bad? I mean, what could happen? Here's these bad people. They're doing wicked stuff, and nothing seems to be happening to them. And what Nitai is saying is, don't be so quick to assume that that's the case. Don't abandon your faith that maybe someday these people will be punished by God, be it either in this world or in the world to come. So there was still a very Deuteronomic point of view that said that if you are a good person, good things will happen. And if you are a bad person, bad things will happen. And you may not see those bad things happen to somebody else. You may not see that come to fruition immediately, but that doesn't mean that ultimately they may not be punished in some way. So, don't give up your belief in God, that God cares about human actions and does take them into consideration and into account. And that the basic tenet of a just society cannot always, even a just society cannot always enforce these kinds of ideals, but maybe there is some sort of ultimate judge or punishment for those who don't um, not agree with the community, but support the community in terms of their behavior. So, another interpretation of this last line that Nitai says is that a person, no matter how rich they are, shouldn't feel totally secure in their wealth. Because if they don't act in a righteous manner, they could be the victim of divine retribution. It will eventually come. And, many of us have read that book when bad things happen to good people. And we wonder why we see good people, wonderful families, suffer, have terrible things happen to them. And yet sometimes it appears that people who do the most evil things get away with it and never get punished. Well, that is a presumption that we make, because we only know what happens on this earthly plane. We don't know what might happen to them later on in another place after they're gone. So, and the flip side of that is also true, that one who is poor and struggles in life, but is a righteous person, hangs out with the right people, and so on, they shouldn't despair, because divine reward is promised, just like divine retribution is promised. So, just food for thought. I don't know where you sit on the continuum of good versus evil, and why bad people don't suffer and why good people suffer, and so on and so forth. If you believe in a world to come, if you don't believe in a world to come, these are things we can discuss and that you have to determine for yourself. So I think you're beginning to get a little bit of a sense now of the personalities of these rabbis, because if you look at this pair, this twinning of these two rabbis that we just discussed, Joshua ben Parachia, who said, find yourself a rabbi and get for yourself a friend, and judge everybody fairly, don't jump to conclusions. And then we look at Nitai the Arbalite, who says things like, don't hang out with bad people, and don't think just because you're rich that someday you're not going to suffer, and don't think that just because you're poor and you suffer in this life that you're not going to get some rewards in the world to come. And so we have these, we see these different personalities coming out in the rabbis that we are studying. Now we get to Mishnah number 8 in the first chapter. So we're about halfway through the Mishnahs for the first chapter. And as I said at the beginning, we're going to study this first chapter in depth, because I want you to get a sense of the personalities and what Pirkei Avot is like. And then we'll spend some time looking at some of my favorites. And if you have favorites, please, by all means, email me, call me, send them to me, and let me know what it is that's a favorite of yours so that we can include it in this series. So in this particular Mishnah, Mishnah 8 of chapter 1, we're going to meet another pair. So this is the third pair that we're meeting of the 5. And the 2 rabbis are Judah ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shetach, both very interesting characters, and we're going to talk about them a little bit. So this third pair, the subject of the teaching of Rabbi Judah ben Tabai, he's the first of the pair. He taught about the proper attitude of the judge to the litigants who come before him. So there was this focus, as I said, in Pirkei Avot on morals and values and judgment and so on and so forth. So Judah ben Tabai was interested in when you are sitting as a judge in a Sanhedrin or in a court, and you look out at you and there's these 2 litigants or 2 people standing in front of you, and one of them is bringing a case against the other. How do you treat them? And these 2, Shimon ben Shetach and Judah ben Tabai, they received the oral tradition from them. And the them that is being referred to here is the pair from before them that we just discussed. So this is what Yehuda or Judah ben Tabai said. Do not, as a judge, play the part of an advocate. And when the litigants are standing before you, look upon them as if they were both guilty. Now that's kind of interesting. And when they leave your presence, look upon them as if they were both innocent when they have accepted the judgment. So we have these 2 people. They come before the judge. One of them thinks he's got a great case. The other one thinks they didn't do anything wrong and that this guy is, doing something that is not correct. I didn't, my ox didn't get into his field and kill one of his sheep. It was somebody else's. And so how is the judge supposed to approach these 2 litigants? And what Judah ben Tabai is saying is, when they come into the courtroom, look at them as if they're both guilty. In other words, both of them have an agenda. One of them, the plaintiff, is trying to get something from the other guy. The defendant is trying to say, didn't happen that way. I'm not responsible, whatever it might have been. So one is trying to gain something. The other one is trying to not be found liable or guilty because they'll have a fine or something else. And so they both have an agenda. So the judge is to understand that they have this agenda when they come in, and is supposed to look at them both with a kind of a critical eye, like, they're both trying to get something here. However, when the case is over, you're supposed to judge the litigants as if they're both innocent, because they have now accepted whatever the judgment is, and the case is resolved, and they're leaving your courtroom. So Judah is teaching us 3 different things concerning the attitude of the judge. The very first thing is that the judge is not supposed to advocate on either side. Very often we watch some of these courtroom shows on TV like Judge Judy and some others, and it seems as if the judge has it in for one or the other right off the bat, and you can't quite, that they've read documents that we haven't been privy to yet, but nevertheless, it seems like they've kind of got, I don't know, they kind of seem to be favoring one or the other. So Judah says, don't advocate for either side. If a litigant doesn't make the best claim that he could make, the judge isn't allowed to make the claim on his behalf. So the litigant says, I saw a guy in a red shirt and he stole my bicycle. And the judge looks at the defendant and he says, well, you have a red shirt, don't you? So the judge is not permitted to advocate on the side of either of the parties in the claim. The judge is not allowed to make a claim on anyone's behalf, and the judge cannot act the part of the lawyer. They have to be the judge, and they have to judge based upon the claims that are made, not evidence that doesn't come before them, but only what they hear. So lawyers in those days were not usual participants in trials at the time of the Mishnah. So in another version of this teaching, we find here that the judge should not make himself like the chief of judges. And if you look at the Hebrew, the term for chief of judges and advocate, there's only one difference in the Hebrew letter. And so we have to be careful that the judge does not become like an advocate for one or the other side. And the judge has a responsibility. They have to carefully check all the facts before they make a ruling. He makes a ruling. And then basically in the next part of what Yehuda says, it's kind of the flip side of the coin of the other. Before the judgment is delivered, the judge has to examine both parties as if both are guilty. Even if he thinks that one party is telling the truth and the other party is lying, he's got to try to examine them both really impartially with kind of a skeptical eye, like what are they getting out of this? Because if he favors one side before the trial, justice will never be served. It'll be a false ruling. When the two sides, however, finally accept the judgment of the judge, he's got to look at both sides as innocent, and that could be for two reasons. First of all, the one who's found guilty accepts the judgment, and that means that in the end, they're willing to do the right thing. Yes, you're right. It was my ox that got out of my field and killed my neighbor's sheep, and therefore I accept responsibility and I will pay the fine. And his acceptance of the judgment is a form of repentance, because once that judgment is accepted, it's as if one is saying, I understand that even though the ox got out by accident, I thought I'd locked the gate, he got out and he killed that poor sheep anyway. I accept responsibility. I'm sorry that it happened. And so it's a form of repentance. And secondly, the judge can never be 100% sure of the correctness of the sentence. So even nowadays, where judges have sentencing guidelines that says you can give somebody X number of years to X number of years, there's usually some pretty broad latitude. And there was a recognition by Yehuda that even judges probably go home at night wondering, even though I gave a sentence that was within the guidelines, was it the right sentence? Did this guy really deserve more, or did this guy really deserve less than I gave them? So we're beginning to understand a little bit about the judiciary and what that looked like in Yehuda's day. Okay, now his twin, and I hope we have some time to do this one, and if not, we'll continue next week. Shimon ben Shetach used to say, be thorough in the interrogation of witnesses and be careful with your words, lest from them they learn to lie. Meaning, lest from the words that you speak, those who are listening to your words learn to lie. Shimon ben Shetach, so he continues this kind of instruction book for the judges. And the first statement is pretty self-explanatory. Be thorough in the interrogation of witnesses. Leave no stone unturned. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Let them say what they need to say. Ask every question. Get the answers to your satisfaction. But the second statement is that the judge needs to be careful while they're examining these witnesses, because they don't want to inadvertently teach them something that they could say that might win the case for their side. So this kind of goes along with what our prior rabbi said about don't be an advocate. If the judge says, well, you have a red shirt, don't you? And he saw a person with a red shirt stealing his bicycle, and then the judge says, but I happen to know that you do laundry on Wednesdays, and so that red shirt was probably in the laundry. So it couldn't have been you that stole the bike. I mean, this is a very outrageous example that I'm giving you here, but the judge doesn't want to be looked at as somebody who is moving the plaintiff or the defendant in any one particular direction, because that is going to sway the judgment. So his statement was a little more succinct than Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. But I want to tell you something interesting about Rabbi Shimon. He's the second person of this third pair, and he lived during the rule of Alexander Janos and his wife Shelomit. Now let me tell you about Alexander Janos a little bit, and I did a little bit of research about him, and I'll tell you when he reigned so that you can get a sense of when Shimon was around. He was the second king of the Hasmonean dynasty, and he ruled, so he was a Jewish king, and he ruled over an expanding kingdom of Judea from the years 103 to 76 before the Common Era. And so 103 to 76 is about 23 years. Is that right? I'm trying to do the math backwards. 103 to, about 27 years. Okay? And he was married to this woman by the name of Shelomit in the Hebrew, but in the Greek, her name was Salome, and Queen Salome was, I think, involved in 101 Arabian Nights. I don't know. I have to go back and read my literature again. But here's how she married him. And by the way, she was Shimon ben Shetach's sister. So Shimon's brother-in-law was the king. And it's good to be the king, but if you can't be the king, you want to be the king's brother-in-law. And she became the queen when her husband, the king's brother, his brother, died. And at the time, they had what was known as levirate marriage, where if a woman's husband died and she was left childless, she had to marry her brother-in-law. Well, her brother-in-law, and she had no children when her husband died, and her brother-in-law just happened to be the king. And her own brother, this Shimon ben Shetach, was a Pharisaic sage. So he was a precursor of the rabbis. And Shimon ben Shetach, there were a number of these Pharisees who were killed by this king, because the Hasmonean dynasty was in favor of the Sadducees, who were the priests. This is all getting very involved. So I think that rather than trying to finish this now, this morning, and cut into your exercise time, because I will never live it down if I cut into your exercise time, I'm going to say lehitraot for now. Don't forget tonight, 4:45 this afternoon, Erev Shabbat blessings. I'll be live. And then tomorrow morning, services at 10 o'clock, followed by Shabbat Chaverim at 1 o'clock. We have a busy Shabbat weekend coming up. I hope you'll join me for everything. And I will see you again this evening for blessings. Shabbat Shalom early and Lihitraot. Bye bye.